In this second and special episode, we bring the very last part of his presentation, which was dominated by questions focused on the areas he addressed them on.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Andorra on behalf of the group of Francophone ambassadors, followed by Switzerland and Palau.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam President. And I thank you, Mr. Otunnu, for presenting your strategic vision. And you spoke in French at the beginning of your presentation. We appreciate that. At a time when the UN is facing systemic crises and growing fragmentation of the international order, we believe that the issue of multilingualism is not a secondary one, the strategic lever to strengthen legitimacy, effectiveness, and inclusiveness in the multilateral system. We'd like to hear your personal position and your ability to bring this issue to the highest levels. Could you clarify in your UN work the role that you would place on multilingualism in your background and how you've come here? If you are elected Secretary General, how do you plan to make multilingualism a pivotal element of your leadership and not a simple functional tool? How will you ensure that your team's composition effectively represents linguistic, cultural, and geographic diversity at the UN? And lastly, with regard to your responsibilities when it comes to Secretariat governance, how do you plan to improve HR management to ensure that linguistic skills are fully recognized and given value during recruitment and progression processes in accordance with the requirements of linguistic diversity in Secretariat? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Andorra on behalf of the group of Francophone ambassadors. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. You know, language is not just about communication. Language is a window on a society. Language is a badge of identity of a society. So languages, and all our languages, very important. In my prepared remarks, which I didn't read, I say more about the importance of multilingualism and promoting that within the United Nations. I believe in that very strongly. I come from a continent where there are many languages and where, you know, some of the more international ones are French, Arabic, Swahili, Hausa. There are many, many languages. So I believe that we should promote multilingualism and have the UN, as much as possible, reflect the world that it is composed of.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland on behalf of the ACT Group, followed by Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States.
Thank you, Madam President, for convening this dialogue, and thank you, Mr. Otunnu, for presenting your vision. Good afternoon, colleagues. I speak on behalf of the Accountability, Coherence and Transparency Group, a cross-regional group of 27 member states committed to a transparent and accountable UN. We have two questions. The ACT Group has developed a code of conduct regarding Security Council action against genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes. This code of conduct urges Security Council members to pledge against voting no on credible draft resolutions aimed at preventing or halting genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes, and encourages all Council members to take timely, decisive action during mass atrocities. It is supported by 130 member states. How do you see the SG's role in promoting the implementation of this code of conduct? And the second question, the selection and appointment process for the SG is fundamentally a joint process between the Security Council and the GA. But it is not the only area where they have a complementary mandate. How do you see the role of the GA in the maintenance of international peace and security? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Switzerland on behalf of the ACT Group. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. First, in terms of a joint process, the design of the UN Charter was to have the two bodies work in very close cooperation. And I think we should do everything to restore that the General Assembly and the Security Council work very closely together. Because the full membership is very important, The 15, including the 5, are also very important. So we really should have a cooperation between the two bodies. Now, the General Assembly initially did not have the role of peace and security. But that changed a little bit with the Uniting for Peace resolution, I think 1950. Very rarely used, very sparingly used, but it exists. But the most important thing is we should try not to enlarge polarization and tension within the UN as a body. It's one body. We should promote cooperation. And as Secretary General, I would be a go-between if there was any kind of tension to make sure that I bring the General Assembly, the Security Council, to some kind of cooperation. It is for the benefit of the institution. And I have good experience in working in both. Now, in terms of the code of conduct of which you speak, you know, all my adult life, I have been engaged in the vineyard of promoting human rights. From the time we resisted Idi Amin in Uganda as a young person to this day. More than that, you know that here at the United Nations, it fell to my lot to design, persuade Security Council members, and incorporate the regime for protecting children in situations of war. It is operational to this day. And from that, other mandates have now been added. So these are matters which are very close to my heart, which speaks to my experience, and where I have some idea what to do, where, and with whom.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States, followed by Singapore and Australia.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for convening this important dialogue. And I also wish to thank Mr. Otunnu for your interaction with us today. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the 39 members of the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS. As a group of countries in special situations, the credibility of the United Nations lies in its ability to respond to the unique circumstances of SIDS, correct long-standing inequities, and deliver results for the most vulnerable. In this regard, allow me to pose the following questions. First, how will you, as Secretary General, ensure that the United Nations system is more accessible, better coordinated, and tailored to the unique vulnerabilities of SIDS to better support the full implementation of the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS? And secondly, how will you use your leadership to accelerate global ambition and action on climate change, particularly to keep 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach, while ensuring that SIDS receive scaled-up, predictable, and accessible finance for adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage in line with international commitments? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. One of the very first systematic studies done on the vulnerability and situation of small island states and small countries was, I think, done under the auspices of the Commonwealth. Sridhar Ramphal was the chair. I was a member of that commission. It did, I think, some of the early work on this matter. I've followed this ever since. I'm very acutely aware of the vulnerability, the situations of island states, small states, landlocked states. My own country of birth is landlocked and small. So I'm very acutely sensitive to the situation, and this will continue to be very much on the agenda of the Secretary General if I'm given the chance, and would certainly be advocate for them in every fora that matters. On the issue of climate change, let me say this. We have a number of very practical, common threats to our common humanity. Climate change is one. Earlier we spoke about how to harness the incredible impact of artificial intelligence. We can multiply the list. I would only appeal to member states that let us approach these common challenges that face humanity with cooperation and innovation, not from the point of view of perhaps ideological clashes and ideological confrontation, but in a very practical, pragmatic way with innovation and what we can do when we cooperate.
Thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore on behalf of the Small States Group.
Thank you very much, Madam President, for convening this meeting, and a warm welcome to Mr. Otunnu. Indeed, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Small States Group, which is a cross-regional grouping of small states comprising both developed and developing countries. And more than 50 countries have aligned with this statement and will make this list available after this meeting. Madam President and Mr. Otunnu, we are living in a volatile and dangerous period in international relations characterized by geopolitical tension and conflict. And for small states, an effective multilateral system founded on the principles of the UN Charter and international law is not an option, but an existential necessity. The next Secretary General will play a critical role, not only in defending the UN Charter, but also in reinvigorating and reshaping the role and relevance of the UN. And we as small states look to the Secretary General to safeguard the interests of all member states, not just the big major powers and the permanent members, but to look after, in particular, the interests of the smallest, weakest, and most vulnerable members of the UN. We do not want a world of might is right where international law and the sovereignty and territorial integrity of small states are violated with impunity. The members of the SSG stand ready to work with the next Secretary General and all member states to strengthen the role of the UN and to defend international law and multilateralism. Let me now go to the questions, and I'll focus on two in the interest of brevity. First, what steps, Mr. Otunnu, will you take to strengthen the role of the General Assembly, especially at a time when the Council has been unable to take decisive action? And in particular, how will you support and strengthen the office of the President of the General Assembly? Second, the SDGs and the Pact for the Future and the Global Digital Compact are landmark outcome documents which provide a roadmap for global action and partnership. What would you do to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs, the Pact for the Future, and the Global Digital Compact? Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Singapore on behalf of the Small States Group. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. If I may say so, Excellency, you know, the UN as a multilateral institution is not only crucial for small states, I think it is important for all of us. That is why any reform we carry out should be to strengthen multilateralism, not to kill it. We shouldn't throw away the baby with the water in our reform project. So the sentiments you feel as small states, I think most member states feel. Let us work together to rescue multilateralism, strengthen it, reform the institution. Secondly, the importance of international law. Absolutely, absolutely. I strongly believe in that. I've contributed to that at various levels. I've taught that in various universities. It's very important for me personally and important to this institution. Now, you ask about the General Assembly and the Security Council. You know, the way this institution is designed, perhaps we should make the mistake. The General Assembly cannot take the place of the Security Council. Each have their role well defined within the Charter. But what we should promote, what the Secretary General should encourage, is cooperation between the two bodies, not conflict, not one taking over from the other. That is the way I would approach this. On SDGs, we are not on track to achieve what has been promulgated. I hope we can improve. And if I was elected Secretary General, I would make this a priority because the SDGs are very, very important to our development agenda, especially for the developing countries. And again, as I said earlier, countries must do their homework and be good custodian of the development agenda. They should fight corruption. They should plan. They should invest. They should mobilize what they can domestically. And then ask the Secretary General to help them mobilize what can be mobilized internationally. And I would be ready to do that.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia on behalf of Cairns, followed by New Zealand and Uganda.
Madam President, Excellencies, Mr. Otunnu, a warm welcome. I have the honour to address you today on behalf of Canada, Australia, and my own New Zealand and my own country, Australia. At a time of heightened global uncertainty and complex international challenges, the United Nations' ability to fulfil its core mandate rests on its institutional credibility, capability, and capacity. Institutional credibility requires bold and principled leadership, including the ability to deploy the Secretary-General's good officers with political courage and effect. Institutional capability requires a UN that is focused on upholding all three pillars of its work and translates early warning into early action. Institutional capacity requires experienced and ethical management and realistic and fit-for-purpose mandates that sharpen effectiveness and delivery. How do you think the UN80 initiative is working to align leadership, authority and resources to restore confidence in the UN and enable it to deliver results? And how would you build on the UN80 initiative to make it more effective? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia on behalf of Cairns. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I agree. All three pillars are very important. We should continue to work on all of them. That being said, it is fair to say that since the UN was founded in the aftermath of this horrific world war and the Holocaust, that particular emphasis should be placed on ending conflicts. And also because of the unbelievable suffering this visits on innocent people. That is why I have flagged the major conflicts going on now as a particular priority of the Secretary General. But all the three pillars are important. We must continue to work on all of them. Now, in terms of resources, it is not easy, and there's no easy answer. What is clear is that the UN is under enormous pressure. It can't carry all this burden. It is the reason why the UN should very intentionally work in partnership with other actors, especially regional organizations. When the UN was founded, there were barely any regional organizations. Thank God today there are several regional organizations, and some have played very useful and very important role. They should be encouraged. They should be empowered. There should be partnership and cooperation between the UN and the regional bodies. And the UN should also reach out to other actors when we speak about, for example, artificial intelligence. The private sector, technology companies, they're very important in this. They should be at the table. They should have their say at the table. And this goes for climate change. It can go for other areas of UN activities as well. We should be more open to others, and they open to us.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of New Zealand on behalf of the UN80 Global Group.
President, Mr. Otunnu, Excellencies, dear colleagues, I have the honour to ask the following question on behalf of the UN80 Global Group, a cross-regional group comprising of Barbados, Indonesia, Jordan, Kenya, Norway, Mexico, Senegal, Singapore, and my own country, New Zealand. Mr. Otunnu, if elected as the next Secretary-General, what will you do to strengthen trust between the Secretariat and Member States, between the Executive Office of the Secretary-General and the rest of the UN system, and ultimately to restore global confidence in the United Nations itself? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of New Zealand on behalf of the UN80 Global Group. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. It is clear that the primary stakeholders for the UN are member states, and that the Secretary General and the Secretariat work for the member states in the service of the people. It's important there should be cooperation between member states and the Secretary General and the Secretariat. Indeed, when we are involved in reform as we are now, we should take into account the views, the perspectives of member states, of the staff of the United Nations. Just at the opening of this session, we remembered UN staff who are paid with their lives in very dangerous situations. So the UN staff, their views, their role, and cooperation between the UN Secretariat and the membership is very important. And as Secretary General, I would especially work to promote and encourage that. There shouldn't be two separate silos, and there should be no tension between the two. In terms of trust, you know, I have worked very closely with all members of the UN. I've worked very closely with members of the Security Council, with the P5. I have the experience of working with them all in difficult and not so difficult situations. I can draw on that. We cannot go very far if there is no trust, whether between the Secretary General and member states, between the Security Council and the General Assembly, between the staff and member states. The Secretary General is the go-between. He or she must make sure that trust is restored, that we are one house and moving in the same direction with common interests for humanity. Very, very important. Not easy, but very important.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement. So far, the last speaker on behalf of the group, and then followed by member states, Latvia, Namibia, and many others.
I'm honored to speak on behalf of the 120 member states of the Non-Aligned Movement. The Non-Aligned Movement affirms the role of the United Nations in promoting multilateralism and international cooperation, which are essential for addressing global challenges that impact the member states of the movement. In this context, I raised the following questions. The declaration, question 1, the Declaration on the Right to Development was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1986, that is 40 years ago. What is your position on the right to development? And how would you advance its implementation within the UN system when you become the next Secretary General? Question 2, how do you assess the impact of unilateral coercive measures on the ability of affected developing countries to achieve sustainable development and fully implement the 2030 Agenda? What concrete actions would you promote in your capacity as next Secretary General to strengthen the role of the United Nations in opposing such measures that violate the UN Charter, urging their elimination and promoting mechanisms to prevent their application? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Excellency, I was there when the resolution on the right to development was adopted. As I said earlier, because human rights are so fundamental and so important, please let us return to the basics, which are clear in the Charter. What really matters is what we should return to. Development is very important. It's one of the 3 pillars of UN action. And I would support that fully. It affects a large swath of the membership of the UN and of the population of the world. So we must not in any way relent in our efforts to promote development, and that is why the fate of the SDGs are very important. I've already commented on that. I've commented on the rule of law, all aspects of the rule of law. The Secretary General should encourage member states and all concerned to conduct themselves in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, in accordance with the principles of the United Nations which have been agreed upon, and in accordance with the norms which have been developed and agreed by the United Nations. That is the role of the Secretary General. He or she didn't make the principles, doesn't make them up, but invokes, promotes, and encourages the application of those principles and those norms.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. As we have exhausted the allotted time for the first segment, while there are still interest from member states to speak on the first segment, in the interest of time, I invite delegations to proceed also to the second segment to allow sufficient time to hear the candidates' response to the questions related to the 3 pillars of the United Nations: peace and security, development, and human rights, even though we already dived into many of them. Civil society questions will be again interspersed with questions from member states. Priority will be given to those who have not spoken in the first segment. And as mentioned before, we will also come to distinguished representative on behalf of their member states. I would like to remind you that speaking time on behalf of individual member states is 2 minutes for the questions and also 2 minutes for answering. As a first speaker, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Latvia, followed by the next civil society organization and Namibia.
Thank you, Madam President, for convening this interactive dialogue. And thank you, Mr. Otunnu, for your presentation on the vision for the position of the Secretary General of the United Nations and your responses so far. I would like to ask 2 questions. First one on the UN role in mediation, and the second one on the emerging technologies. So the first question on mediation: how can the UN remain relevant in mediation when negotiations increasingly happen outside the UN? In other words, how do you envisage to ensure UN's seat at the negotiating table? And the second question on the emerging technologies: which emerging technology challenge, for example, AI, cybersecurity, biotechnology, or others, requires the most urgent UN attention? What will be your first steps to tackle it? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Latvia. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Excellency, mediation, good offices, the go-between, facilitating, convening role of the Secretary General is capital. That is what the Secretary General is there for. So the Secretary General should always be engaged, should be probing, should be listening patiently, should not be shy to suggest. That is one. On emerging technology, there are various spheres of emerging technology. In my view, the one that right now is most transformational, that will have such incredible impact on society, is artificial intelligence. That is why I think it's so important that the UN should come in, convene the stakeholders, put to them certain issues which are important, and hope that we can come up early with a compact that helps to govern the development of artificial intelligence and transform the world for the better and for everybody.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now invite the Assembly to view a pre-recorded video by CMI, Marty Atasari Peace Foundation, our next civil society organization.
Conflict resolution and mediation happen today more and more outside UN official structures and without UN mandate. What could the new UN Secretary General do to better prevent and resolve violent conflicts? And what is the role of civil society in all of this?
I thank CMI for their question. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. When I was involved in developing the regime for the protection of children affected by war, I visited many conflict situations. I met with civil society groups. I met with parties in conflict, those which may be state actors, non-state actors, all of them. So I have some deep experience how to insert the UN in a way which is appropriate, be of service, and help the parties in conflict or help those who are contesting a particular situation. Secondly, I know that preventing conflict is easier said than done, in part because even when the signs are there, the parties in conflict may be in denial. Nevertheless, it is the role of the Secretary General to be engaged, to be prodding, to be suggesting, to be calling attention to what requires action. This perhaps, good officers, mediation, being a facilitator, convener, is one of the most important roles of the Secretary General and is part of the soft power of the Secretary General to which I referred earlier.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the next speaker, to the next distinguished speaker of Namibia, followed by Cuba and Peru.
Thank you, Madam President. In September 2024, world leaders adopted the most wide-ranging international agreement in many years, namely the Pact for the Future. The Pact has brought renewed impetus towards the implementation of the SDGs. This notable agreement has reinvigorated the multilateral system and has given direction in a number of important global multilateral thematic issues. My question to Mr. Otunnu is, what is your vision to implementing the Pact for the Future, and how best can the Secretariat support Member States in its implementation ahead of the 2028 review? Secondly, in the Pact for the Future, world leaders agreed that Africa should be treated as a priority and a special case as far as the reform of the UN Security Council is concerned. What is your understanding of this unique decision taken by Member States, and how would your office support its implementation? Lastly, what would be your plan to making the international financial architecture more representative and fair, as borrowing rates for Africa are much higher than other parts of the world, thereby structurally disadvantaging Africa's development? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Namibia. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. In terms of reorganizing and restructuring international financial institutions, I do not believe that the Secretary General would have a key role there, but the Secretary General, nevertheless, must always be ready to suggest, draw attention to some of the historical imbalances, draw attention to vulnerabilities, so that those who are at the table and make the decision would take these into account. In terms of what the Pact for the Future says about Africa's outlook on reform of the Security Council, perhaps, Africa outlook is partly determined by what is viewed by Africa as a historical imbalance. But as I said earlier, reforming the Security Council is not the primary role, doesn't belong to the Secretary General, even though the Secretary General should encourage, should draw attention to factors to be taken into account, and should try to encourage some kind of a consensus to emerge. The main discussion in the processes which are already in place, the intergovernmental process in place, is really between the member states, especially the permanent five, and the rest of the membership. The Pact for the Future was a very important landmark document. We should work with it, and I hope that come 2028, we will have much to show in terms of what has been achieved as a result of the Pact for the Future. But I support very much the provisions of the Pact. I support very much the measures that needs to be taken. I hope that 2028 would show good results.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Muchas gracias, señora.
Thank you very much. Madam President, Mr. Olara Otunnu, Cuba thanks you for this opportunity to engage in these interactive dialogues, and we reiterate the need for the selection process for the Secretary-General to be open, transparent and inclusive. We align ourselves with the questions asked by the G77, the NARM and AOSIS, and we'd like to ask the following questions in our national capacity. What concrete structural reforms will you engage in to transform the international financial system into one that is more just, inclusive and representative, that would effectively respond to the needs and priorities of developing countries, including access to finance, debt relief, and louder voice and agency in decision-making? And how do you see the role of the UN in this process? Our second question: given the growing rise of conflicts and the proliferation of warmongering rhetoric, what actions will the Secretary-General engage in to promote a culture of peace, the peaceful settlement of disputes, and respect for the principle of the non-use of force? Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cuba. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Excellency, first, the Secretary-General should always invoke the Charter. They should always rest on the principles of the Charter, regardless of the situation, in a way which is impartial, in a way which is equal, and a way which is responsible. Secondly, Excellency, about the structures of the IFIs, the International Financial Institution, two roles for the Secretary-General. They are not central. I don't want to mislead you. They are not central, but they are nevertheless important roles to be played by the Secretary-General. One is advocacy, using the moral platform of the Secretary-General, using the soft power of the Secretary-General to sensitize, to highlight, to underscore the important factors that should be taken into account by the decision makers. And secondly, in the case of particular countries in need, as I said earlier, when they have done their own homework and their own planning and their own mobilization of resources domestically and fighting corruption, is for the Secretary-General to knock on certain doors on their behalf. These are the two roles for the Secretary-General. And then those who must decide on restructuring the international financial institution take this into account.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Peru, followed by the Russian Federation and the next civil society organization.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Mr. Otunnu, for your presentation. Peru is participating in this dialogue with the firm commitment to strengthen the United Nations in order for it to be able to address in a cooperative manner the challenges that humanity faces. Inspired by the legacy of Pérez de Cuellar, the only UN Secretary-General from the Latin American and the Caribbean region, we reaffirm the importance of leadership that is able to bring about consensus in the current international context that is marked by growing complexity, volatility, and uncertainty. In fact, my delegation wishes to recognize that Mr. Otunnu was a key stakeholder in the election of Ambassador de Cuellar, representing his country at the Security Council during the crucial moments for that selection process. We'd like to ask the following question. Next year, 2027, will see the beginning of the debate on the future of the Sustainable Development Goals, moving towards 2030. So what do you think about what should happen after 2030? What concrete actions will you be engaging in to bring back the effective capacity of the Secretary-General to lead, to contribute, to respond to emerging threats to international peace and security, such as transnational organized crime and AI governance? Those are our questions. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Peru. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Yes, indeed, I have very fond memories and great respect for Secretary-General Pérez de Cuellar. on the SDGs, there are two things that we need to do. First, the Secretary General need to find ways and knock on doors to generate more resources for countries which are struggling to fulfill the SDGs. But again, I repeat, countries that have done their own work at home, they're responsible, they're fighting corruption, they're planning, they're investing, they're mobilizing resources. Then the Secretary General can come and give a helping hand. And secondly, it's also, I think, important that in terms of advocacy, the Secretary General should continue to be a key advocate. And thirdly, I would say this, I think I said it earlier, that for me it's very important the UN shouldn't be a diplomatic ivory tower. The SDGs are important. I believe in them. But we should now follow the trail of the SDGs as they go to national and to community levels to make sure that we are connected, that we have the same understanding, and that these things will in fact produce the results we want. I don't have time to give you examples of how some of the Millennium Development Goals that I was very much involved in went wrong in terms of implementation at the national and local levels. We should guard against that.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
Distinguished President, Russia believes it's important to select the most worthy candidate that will be in line with the high standards of professionalism and competency and dedication to the goals and principles of the UN Charter in all of their entirety and interconnection. So we'd like to therefore ask a few questions to Mr. Otunnu. First of all, Mr. Otunnu, the Secretary General, is to be guided by the General Assembly. Would you think that it ought to be guided by resolutions that go beyond the UN's authority, especially those that are currently considered by the Security Council? Do you believe that the principles of the Charter can be ranked by importance, in which the Secretariat would be able to arbitrarily interpret situations using certain principles, for example, for territorial integrity and self-determination? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Excellency, as I said earlier, the role of the Security Council, the role of the General Assembly, complementary, as set out in the Charter. One shouldn't try to displace the other. And also, as much as possible, we should avoid conflict between the two institutions. That being said, we do have in the record of the UN, the Uniting for Peace, going back to 1950, as I said earlier, used very rarely and very sparingly. And as Secretary General, I'll do everything to make sure that we bring back cooperation, cordiality between these two important organs of the United Nations, the Security Council and the General Assembly, and even among the Security Council members.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the next civil society organization, the African Development Interchange Network. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. For 80 years, the United Nations has never been led rights of women and girls.
Sorry, can we stop the time and you repeat because we could not hear you? I think the microphone was not working. If you could just start again and we put the timer again as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. For 80 years, the United Nations has never been led by a woman.
Sorry again, but I think you're pressing the microphone. Once it's on, don't press the button. So we go again.
For 80 years, the United Nations has never been led by a woman, even as gender equality and the human rights of women and girls remain central to its commitments. At a time when those rights are increasingly being challenged, how would you, Mr. Otunnu, use the authority and leadership of the Secretary General to defend hard-won gains, confront gender-based violence and discrimination, and ensure that equality is reflected within the United Nations itself? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your understanding, and everybody could understand the question. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Madam. I believe strongly in equality. I believe strongly in gender parity and would promote that at every opportunity as Secretary General. Secondly, Madam, I spent several years, it was pioneering work at the time, incorporating the protection, the well-being of children and women and innocent people as an integral and substantive aspect of the peace and security agenda of the Security Council. I'm very happy that that has now been broadened to incorporate other aspects of peace and security, and I support that very, very strongly. So what you are suggesting is a natural extension of what I've been doing for many, many years. I also said earlier that one of the reasons why we can't be indifferent to the major conflicts going on is when we see the impact of that conflict on the ground, what it does to children, women, and innocent people.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ecuador, followed by Indonesia, the Philippines, and the next civil society organization. These are so far the remaining speakers on the list. If anybody else would like to request the floor, please press the button now. Otherwise, we would close this. Please, the distinguished representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank Mr. Otunnu for participating in these dialogues. In different parts of the planet, transnational organised crime is undermining state institutions, feeding violence, exacerbating conflicts, and compromising the protection of human rights. Your vision statement underscores the importance of prevention, early action, strengthening cooperation with regional organisations, and the leadership of the Secretary-General to build consensus. In this context, do you think that the United Nations should give more priority to transnational organised crime within its peace and security agenda? And what concrete initiatives would you engage in as Secretary-General to promote a more comprehensive and coordinated response from the UN system and from regional organisations in response to this challenge? Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ecuador. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
This is a new evolving phenomenon with major implications. And there are parts of the world which are already being seriously affected by transnational organized crimes. The UN should look very carefully at this and see what contribution it can make beyond what is now being done by the agencies which are in place. So I will do more homework in that area. I can't say now for you that this and that is what we'll do, but it's a very important issue. It should be looked at very seriously and something proposed that can make a contribution to pushing back the growth of transnational organized crimes.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
We appreciate the President of the General Assembly for convening this meeting. Excellency, we thank you for sharing your vision for the future of the United Nations. At a time when multilateralism is facing increasing fragmentation, the role of the Secretary General is more critical than ever to serve as a moral leader and a bridge builder. In this regard, Indonesia would like to pose the following questions. With multilateralism under increasing strain, do you believe incremental reform is sufficient, or is there a need for more fundamental recalibration to the system? How will you overcome persistent resistance to change while ensuring the UN adapts to current and future realities? Second, in an era of complex fragmentation, how do you intend to revitalize the UN role as the prominent forum for open dialogue among leaders to foster mutual understanding and solidarity? Lastly, how do you envision strengthening meaningful youth participation in shaping global norms and contributing to forward-looking and future-ready multilateral solution? We look forward to your insights. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I said earlier that even though member states are the immediate association that compose the UN is also about the people. And so the Secretary General should reach out to the people, should invite them to be involved, should connect the UN to them, should give them some sense of hope and faith in this institution. And when I'm speaking about the people, obviously, perhaps the most important single segment are the youth. After all, the Charter says succeeding generations. And so we should get them more engaged with the work and the enterprise of the United Nations. And then you spoke about resistance to reform. Well, there may be a tendency to have some pockets of resistance. I wouldn't be surprised if within the Secretariat, among member states, the role of the Secretary General is to work on that, to make sure that we go from resistance to acceptance and cooperation. Because long-term, these reforms are for the benefit of the United Nations and for the people of the world. Long-term, the risks are real if we don't face up to serious, thoroughgoing reforms right now. Now, you spoke about incremental or fundamental. I think in my remarks it's clear. I said reform is not an optional choice. Right now, it is an imperative. And therefore, to me, we should go do fundamental changes. We should change the attitude of our attitude. We should change the culture of work, like any major institutions in the world will do all the time. It should be the same at the United Nations.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor as the next speaker to the distinguished representative of the Philippines, followed by the next civil society organization, which will also ask the last questions for today's interactive dialogue. So we will end a bit earlier. Please, distinguished representative of Indonesia, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Mr. Otunnu, we thank you for sharing your vision for the future of the United Nations. As chair of the like-minded group for middle-income countries, the Philippines would like to inquire how you believe the UN's support to middle-income countries can be improved, considering that the majority of the world's poor continue to live in middle-income countries, including a strategic plan for action for mix and a dedicated focal point in the Secretariat, which the like-minded group have been consistently calling for. In particular, how do you see the opportunities provided by UNAID to rethink and recalibrate and strengthen partnerships for and with the middle-income countries throughout the United Nations system? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines indeed. I now give the floor to Mr. Otunnu again to answer.
Excellency, you know, in working on this, we should not leave any group out. For example, quite rightly, we have been putting emphasis on the most vulnerable countries, least developed countries, island countries, for understandable reason. But we must not leave out of the picture middle-income countries that have done relatively well. We want them to do even better. So as Secretary General, I would remain engaged with their development. I would remain engaged with their concerns. I would be advocate for them as well.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. As a final question, I now give the floor to the last civil society organization and invite the Assembly to view a pre-recorded video by Ayufun Foundation Trust.
On behalf of Edifund Foundation Trust India, grassroots organizations working directly with vulnerable community are already addressing urgent challenges such as hunger, climate change, and social inequality, often with minimal resources. Despite their impact, they remain underrepresented in global decision-making and struggle to access institutional funding. If appointed as Secretary General, how will you ensure the grassroots civil society organizations are meaningfully included in shaping development policies and gain equitable access to funding and support within the United Nations system?
I thank the Foundation Trust, OTUNU. Please, Mr. Otunnu, to respond to the last question, also sum up the interactive dialogue.
Grassroots and civil society, that is where I've been buried the last 5 years in the project of Rocho Pacho in northern Uganda, which is working with women and youth and communities of faith and people of different political persuasion coming together in a movement to rebuild a broken society. So I have some experience of doing that. I would just say to you, distinguished excellencies and delegates, that what I bring are decades of experience across the UN pillars. It is decades in every situation of leadership working to build consensus, working to propose innovative solutions. And it is experience, as this last question suggests, of working at the grassroots. I feel at home here, but not only here. I'm at home at the national level in different parts of the world. I've worked with them, I've been to their countryside. And I'm at home at the grassroots. That's where I've been the last 5 years, not just in my country, but also elsewhere when I was involved with the UN. So I just hope that you will give consideration to this candidature and that what I bring may be helpful for the UN at this critical moment and the kind of leadership it needs. I thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. We have come to the end of this interactive dialogue. I would like to thank the candidate, you, Mr. Otunnu. I would like to thank you, all delegations and distinguished representatives, for your participation and your contributions. As announced in my letter at the beginning of the week, we have another interactive dialogue tomorrow as we have another candidate. So we will be back tomorrow. I wish you all a good day. The meeting is adjourned.